this is about the state of the economy. Today, we had India's retail inflation data coming out in the month of December. It has seen a jump. In fact, it has come in at 5.59%, which is slightly higher than what we saw in the month of November at about 4.91%. We had the industrial output data also coming out for the month of November at 1.4%. It has declined from the kind of growth we saw in October at 3.2%. So how should we really look at these numbers? Let's understand from Madan Sabnavis, Chief Economist, Bank of Baroda, joining us on the broadcast this evening. Mr. Sabnavis, thank you for joining us here on Mirror Now. I firstly want to talk to you about the issue of inflation. Is this a shocking number that we've got for the month of December, or you think it's seasonal?
No, I think it is not exactly a shocking number. It was something very much expected. And in fact, we're going to have numbers above 5% for the remaining 3 months of the year also, which means that given that we had an average of around 6.2 inflation in 2021, it's going to be the second year where we're having above 5%. But what is really disturbing is that we have seen that food articles, which did seem to be coming down in terms of the intensity of inflation, has once again resurfaced. Edible oils is something which we were aware of, but we have seen that processed foods also have witnessed higher inflation, which is a reflection of the high raw material costs which are being passed on to the consumer. So for example, if you're looking at your bakeries, you're looking at confectionery, the sugar products, I think the costs have gone up, the raw material costs, and the producers were holding on to the prices for over a year. And now I think they have increased the prices, and that's what's getting reflected out here.
So you're saying that for consumers, the prices have gone up because inflation is rate of increase of price over a period of time, and producers have now passed on that increase in cost to the consumers. That is what is being reflected in these numbers, because food inflation specifically has led to this big jump.
Absolutely. It's a food inflation which has been a surprise element this time. So I would say that was not what we were expecting. But the headline inflation was definitely expected to be above 5%, closer to 5.5%. Because if you're looking at what we call core inflation, that has been ruling over 6%, and that's once again replicated out here. And again, the concerns out here is you say that health inflation is above 7%. Now, that's a major concern because we're going through the third wave. All of us are spending more on healthcare. It could be medicines, preventive medicines, or in case of hospitalization. And the fact that health inflation has been relentlessly high and been increasing during the year, I think that is something which is really pinching the pockets.
So what does it mean now? Because this is the last set of inflation data, the retail inflation data that we've got ahead of budget 2022. Do you think it could have an impact on how the budget will be made this time for the upcoming year? What the RBI does next?
If you look at RBI, I think the RBI is cognizant of the fact that while inflation will definitely probably be less than 6% on an average basis for the year, but it's going to be in the region of 5 to 5.5%. I think 5.3% is what they have spoken of. But notwithstanding the fact that inflation is expected to be high, I think the RBI said that since growth doesn't look durable, and if I juxtapose this data with what the CSO had brought out on Friday on GDP, where we're expecting growth of 9.2%, RBI had 9.5%, it basically means that the RBI has a similar situation which it's facing when it had its earlier policy, when it meets again in February. Of course, there will be the benefit of seeing what happened what will happen during the budget and what kind of government borrowing program is being looked at. But definitely these concerns are already known. And to my mind, the RBI may probably decide to continue with a pause. Now, in terms of what the government will do in the budget, I think inflation actually helps the government a lot in the sense that numerically it leads to a higher GDP growth number, which in turn will allow it to that much of elbow room to have a higher fiscal deficit. So just for the viewers, I think the fiscal deficit ratio is defined as fiscal deficit divided by GDP in nominal terms. Now, in nominal terms, the GDP goes up, which is what is happening out here. There would be a tendency for some kind of a benefit to percolate in terms of the fiscal deficit ratio.
So, Mr. Sabnavis, you're saying that ahead of the budget, it's clearly not a bad news for the government, which is preparing the budget 2022, but it in fact has come in as a bad news for consumers because their monthly budget is now getting impacted month after month.
No, not really. I'm not saying that the government will be happy about it, but there are certain benefits which it gets when it sets about the budget. But definitely, on the other hand, the government will also say that, okay, inflation is high, so it cannot really go in for fiscal expansion and going for a higher fiscal deficit. Because if it does goes for higher fiscal deficit, there's a possibility of that triggering demand pull forces. So right now, if you see, most of the inflation is coming mainly on the cost side. So if you're going to spend more and growth doesn't really pick up, there would be the demand side inflation also which will come. So I'm not saying that it's going to be a happy situation for the government, but there would be certain benefits numerically on account of this higher inflation. I don't think the government definitely won't be happy about inflation, because considering the fact that we have elections coming up, inflation is not a good sign.
Well, inflation has actually impacted a lot of elections in the past too. So do you see government intervening in some way if the trend continues like this?
So if you're looking at a major pain point has been edible oils. Now here what happens is that since India imports 60% of its requirements, international prices have gone up substantially. And in fact, if you see, we are looking at inflation in a region around 25 to 30%. If I look at the monthly numbers for edible oils, internationally, we have seen that the prices have actually gone up around 40-45%. So we are actually behind the curve in terms of it. The government has also lowered the customs duties to make sure that the prices come down. But it's a case of saying that the price of edible oil has gone up from 130 rupees to 220 rupees and then been corrected by around 10-15 rupees. We're still paying substantially more than what we were paying last year. So I don't think the government can do anything out here. We'll have to wait for this to go through this particular cycle of high prices of food before the correction really takes place.
Where do you see them heading from here? The retail inflation numbers specifically.
If you look at retail inflation, I would tend to believe that it would remain in this region of around 5.5% for the next 3 months. And we will have to wait for the next season before there can be corrections which take place. When I say seasons, typically your oil season is from October to September, November to October. So we'll have to run this entire cycle right up to the end of, up to mid 2022 before there can be any kind of a correction which takes place. And even then, I do not think the prices are going to crash, but definitely we will have negative numbers as the prices get corrected.
And I also want your views on the industrial output data that has come out. What does it really reflect? Because on a month-on-month basis, it has come down.
See, there are two things which come out of it. One is that we have seen a negative growth in consumer durables goods. Now, that actually would be a kind of bringing us back to the ground because, you know, in the month of September, October, we all felt that a pent-up demand story was playing out and that there would be exponential growth in terms of consumer goods. But I think that spending which we saw was very much limited to the months of September, October. And in November, we have seen it's actually gone down. So while spending was there, but the stocks and inventory which was built up by the companies have been exhausted and definitely there's not been any replenishment. Now, this is significant because we're talking of conditions of a lockdown which are there in the country. There are restrictions on the movement of people. And my guess is that this will last definitely up to March, which means that revival of consumption is going to be pushed back by another 3 months. The second part is in terms of capital goods. Now, here in capital goods also, we have seen a negative growth, which means that investment is not really taking place. So this is a story which we all knew that it was more of the central government which was able to chip in and do a certain amount of investment, but we hadn't seen a corresponding kind of investment being made by the private sector or the state governments. So that is getting reflected in terms of the capital goods sectors. So two major sectors, capital goods and consumer goods, the two engines to growth, have both faltered in this particular month. And my sense is that we may not see a recovery even in the months of December to March.
All right, Mr. Sabnavis, appreciate you joining us here on Mirror Now and helping our viewers understand these two, in fact, numbers that we got today, the retail inflation and the industrial output. One was up, the other one was down. We'll see if there's going to be any kind of intervention from the government side to deal with this particular concern. Thank you, sir, for joining us.